Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we try to cut through the noise and really get to the heart of complex issues. And hey, if you find this kind of analysis valuable, please do check out Mind Expansion Daily for more great content just like this. Today, well, we're tackling something incredibly difficult, really painful, but necessary. The UK grooming gangs scandal. It's a story that involves, horrific abuse, massive institutional failure, and just years of really charged debate. We'd genuinely love to know what you think about how we handle this summary. It's incredibly complex, so leave a comment, agree, disagree, let us know. Or please also tell us where you're listening from. We're really keen to see our community grow worldwide.
It's definitely a topic that needs careful handling. You have to move past the sort of sensational headlines and acknowledge the deep divisions it creates. The scale of it really hit public awareness back in the 2010s, didn't it? Towns like Rotherham, Rochdale. Suddenly these names were synonymous with this crisis. So our goal here really is to look at the history, the heartbreaking stories from victims, and that very, very difficult ethnicity debate, trying to challenge some preconceptions along the way.
Absolutely. And it's not just history, is it? That's the crucial part. This isn't something neatly tucked away in the past. We saw that recent Baroness Casey audit from 2025, finding persistent data gaps. Still, across 31 police forces.
Exactly. And that's maybe the most damning part. After
Right.
all the inquiries, all the reports, the fundamental problem of actually collecting the right data impartially, it's still there.
Wow.
It suggests the systems, the ones meant to protect vulnerable people, are still caught up in the same fears that caused the original failures.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the mechanics of the abuse itself. Looking at the sources, what were the core tactics? These weren't random acts, right? They were organized networks.
No, definitely not random. Highly organized. The patterns are chillingly consistent. Perpetrators deliberately targeted vulnerable kids, often from care homes, maybe broken families. They didn't just attack. They engineered dependency
How did they do that?
through things like small gifts, pretending to offer affection, providing alcohol or drugs, building this false sense of trust. And once that dependency was there, they could coerce the victims into sexual acts, often using, extreme threats. It was methodical exploitation.
And the scale. When you pull together the numbers from the different inquiries, it's just hard to comprehend what figures stand out.
They are truly horrifying. Rotherham, the J report back in 2014, it estimated something like 1,400 victims between 1997 and 2013. Just let that sink in, 1,400.
Unbelievable.
And the way they kept victims quiet, threats involving pouring petrol on them, holding lighters to their hair. We're talking about girls as young as 11.
And Rotherham wasn't an isolated case, sadly. It was just the first domino in a way.
Exactly. Then you had Rochdale. Operation Span 2012, 9 men convicted for abusing 47 girls. And within that case, the detail of one survivor being raped by, I think it was 20 men in a single night.
It's almost impossible to process that level of brutality.
It is. And similar patterns emerged elsewhere. Telford, for instance, estimates suggested around 1,000 victims there too. And the organization was key. These weren't just loose groups. They often used legitimate businesses, taxi firms, takeaways as hubs for trafficking and abuse.
Which brings us to the other side of this horror.
Yeah.
The systemic failure. How could this go on for so long under the noses of the authorities? You mentioned police sometimes dismissing victims as prostitutes, social services being overwhelmed, councils ignoring warnings. But what was the reason behind that inaction?
That's the really uncomfortable question, isn't it? The sources point quite clearly towards one dominant factor, a fear of stirring up community tensions.
So political correctness, essentially, or fear of being called racist.
It seems to be a major part of it, yes. A conscious decision, in many cases, to prioritize perceived social harmony, or perhaps avoid difficult conversations over the actual safety of children. A tragic calculation.
And this wasn't just a sudden failure in the 2010s. The warnings went back much further.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking roots back in the 1990s. Specific warnings were flagged and then ignored. Like in Rochdale, there was a project called Risky Business around 2009 that identified these patterns, but police leadership reportedly didn't act.
And Rotherham had early reports, too.
Yes, Angie Hill wrote reports in 2002 and 2003. They explicitly mentioned Asian gangs, links to drugs, but they were shelved, just put away. And you have to understand the context. Before the big revelations, maybe pre-2010, there was often this societal attitude, a kind of classism almost.
What do you mean?
Well, victims from working class backgrounds, their experiences were sometimes minimized, almost framed as lifestyle choices rather than child abuse. It's shocking to think about now.
And then later, the fear of racism accusations kicked in more strongly.
That's what the ICSA inquiry suggested, yes. It talked about an oversensitivity regarding race, which essentially became a shield, a way for officials to avoid scrutiny, perhaps protect their careers rather than address the abuse head-on.
So early on, it might have been class bias. Later, it was fear of racism claims. But the outcome was the same. Children weren't protected.
Precisely. The system failed them, repeatedly.
And the fact that the 2025 Casey audit shows these data gaps still exist because of those same fears, it's just astounding. It suggests the lesson hasn't been fully learned.
It really damages trust, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Especially when you add in the cases where police officers themselves were found to be abusers. That's a whole other layer of betrayal.
Okay, let's tackle the elephant in the room: ethnicity. This is probably the most contentious part of the whole scandal. You see it playing out everywhere. Some media outlets screaming about Asian gangs, clearly fueling Islamophobia. Others trying so hard to downplay ethnicity that they risk, well, ignoring the victim's specific experiences, like facing racial slurs during the abuse. I've seen people argue that focusing just on the Home Office's national data, which says no single ethnicity dominates, is a way to avoid the specific reality in places like Rotherham or Rochdale. How do the sources navigate this minefield?
Well, the key is impartial reporting of what the evidence actually says, even when it's conflicting or uncomfortable. So yes, the J report on Rotherham did state perpetrators there were overwhelmingly Asian, and it noted victims faced racial abuse. It's a documented fact from that inquiry. Similarly, the Rochdale gang was mainly British Pakistani men. That fact was then widely reported, sometimes irresponsibly, fueling those broader Muslim grooming narratives.
But that's specific to those cases, right? The national picture might be different.
Exactly. That's where the other sources come in. The Home Office analysis in 2020 looked broader nationally and concluded no single ethnicity dominates these crimes overall. Crucially, they stressed that the lack of consistent, good quality data, the very gaps Casey highlighted again in 2025, makes it really hard to draw firm national conclusions.
So the data itself is flawed.
In many ways, yes, or at least incomplete. And then you have, say, a BBC report from 2023, which specifically looked into it and said the evidence does not support a nationwide Muslim problem as the root cause. What becomes clear is how racial politics gets weaponized here. From all sides, sometimes.
How so?
Well, some use the ethnicity angle to push anti-immigrant or Islamophobic agendas like we've seen amplified on platforms like X, even by figures like Elon Musk recently in 2025. But equally, sometimes the focus on race might divert attention from other crucial factors like patriarchy, misogyny, and organized criminal methods that target vulnerability irrespective of race.
So it's not just about race, even if race was a factor in specific locations?
That seems to be the most balanced view, supported by academic research like from UCL. Perpetrators exploit vulnerability, power dynamics. That's the common thread. Race can be part of the context in certain cases, absolutely, and victims' experiences of racial abuse must be acknowledged. But oversimplifying it either way risks stigmatizing entire communities or failing to understand the core mechanics of the exploitation, which ultimately helps no one, least of all the victims.
We absolutely have to shift now away from the statistics and the political debates, crucial as they are, to the human cost. The survivors' stories, they have to be central.
They do, because the data points represent real people, real lives devastated. Hearing their accounts, it's incredibly difficult but vital. You mentioned Sarah Wilson from Rotherham earlier. Groomed at 11, trafficked, beaten, enduring that for years. The impact doesn't just vanish when arrests are made.
What about the long-term effects? What did the sources tell us about life after the abuse?
It's devastating and often lifelong. That 2025 BBC report mentioned 5 women describing daily abuse leading to PTSD that continues to shape their lives years later. And the trauma ripples outwards. We know of cases like one victim from Rochdale, groomed at 14. The impact was so severe she later lost custody of her own children. The cycle of trauma is horrific.
So we're talking mental health crises, addiction, broken families.
Yes, all tragically common outcomes.
Right.
And underpinning it all is something really chilling that came out of research from Manchester Metropolitan University in 2025.
What was that?
They found that often the systems, the police, social services fundamentally didn't see these victims as children. They saw them as somehow complicit or older than their years.
Which made it easier to ignore them, to dismiss their suffering.
Exactly. A complete failure of basic safeguarding, of basic empathy.
But there has been some justice, albeit delayed. Operation Stovewood, for example.
Yes, it's important to note progress is being made, slowly. Operation Stovewood did secure significant convictions in 2025. 7 men sentenced to a total of 106 years. It shows that dedicated, persistent investigation can achieve accountability even after years of institutional failure. So what does this all mean? Where do we stand? I think the scandal is a brutal lesson. It tells us we need evidence, not ideology, to tackle these problems. It demands massive reform of the systems that so profoundly failed vulnerable children. And that failure wasn't just accidental. It stemmed from uh, misplaced political caution, fear, and sometimes, frankly, institutional contempt, especially for victims from less privileged backgrounds.
The call has to be for justice, doesn't it? Listen to survivors, reform the systems properly, and crucially, reject attempts to use racism or fear of being called racist as a shield against accountability. Which leads us to that final thought for you, our listeners, building on that really disturbing finding from the Casey audit in 2025. Given that audit showed data gaps still exist across dozens of police forces, specifically because of fears around racism accusations or generating controversy, what are the real long-term consequences for all of us when our institutions prioritize avoiding controversy over gathering the accurate data needed to actually protect the most vulnerable people in our society? Something to really think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It was a tough one. Before you go, if you got value from this and you want to support what we do, please consider buying us a coffee. The link's right there in the description. And please do like and subscribe to Mind Expansion Daily. It really helps us keep bringing you this kind of analysis. We'll see you next time.